I remember people would promise to come and visit, and then like on the day they would call and say, oh, sorry, something's come up. I met yet another set of disappointments, and that was the baby itself, like not doing what I expected the baby to be doing. You can never have an expectation of things that are out of your control. And you can never have an expectation of things that have not been communicated and agreed. Hello everyone, my name is Kudzie Mapiye, and on this channel I do videos about my life living here in Australia, and I also share different life lessons that I've learned along the way. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing a life lesson, and this is a lesson that I learned from being a first-time mom in Australia. So just to give you a bit of background, is for those of you who might not know, I have two young children. I've got an 8-year-old son and I've got a 2-year-old daughter. Now, when I first had my son in 2015, I had both my children here in Australia. So when I had my son in 2015, let me just say I was in for a rude awakening. I felt like someone had taken a cold glass of water with ice and just poured it on my face. Like, that's how I was rudely awakened. And that's where I want to go into and draw this life lesson from. It is a life lesson about disappointments. That is the thing that I learned most about that period of my life. It was disappointment, expectations, unmet expectations, and all of that. So firstly, I have two main things that disappointed me as a new mother in Australia. The first was what I imagined was going to be my birth story. So any mother would know they have a birth story or a birth plan. And if you go for antenatal appointments, they actually ask you to write down what is your birth plan. Now, I had this fantasy of a birth plan where I would be at home and my husband would be at work, and then my waters would break, and then things you see on TV, and then I would call my husband and then he would rush home and whisk me to the hospital, and then would go there and deliver the baby naturally, and then I would hold the baby on my chest and cry and say, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in the world. That was my birth plan. Nothing went according to plan, because I had a 23-hour labor which ended in an emergency C-section, and it was not anything that I imagined. And after I had my son, because I think because of the nature of the birth and having an emergency C-section, I just didn't recover as well as other people that I was seeing in the ward. Like, I was stuck on my bed. I couldn't even go for walks. I was in so much pain, and I was seeing all these mothers carrying their newborn babies walking around, and I was thinking, what is wrong with me? How come my experience is so different? That was the first disappointment, that things didn't happen the way they were supposed to happen. Now I thought, okay, that is the end of the disappointments. At least I've given birth to a healthy child. Now let's go home and go to part 2 of my expectations. So I remember before we went to the hospital, I was expecting to have so many visitors to come. I laugh now because I just think how unrealistic that was. But anyway, I was expecting to have so many visitors. So I remember my husband went to go and buy a carton of soft drink. I think those 24 packs of soft drinks, and I remember it was like Coca-Cola, and he bought this 24 pack because, and some biscuits, some snacks. Were like, we need to feed the visitors. We need to feed the visitors where they come and see the baby. Let me tell you, my husband and I drank so much Coca-Cola during that period because there were not a lot of visitors that came to see the baby. And I was so disappointed. I remember feeling so hurt that, people were not coming to see my baby, because when people had given birth, like previously, and people like, in the community, people, I would always make sure to go and visit the baby and visit them at home and bring a present. So I had this expectation that, when I have a baby, people are gonna do the same. People are gonna actually come to the hospital and, give me presents, come home and see the baby, and I will be, just having visitor after visitor after visitor after visitor. And that did not happen. I remember people would promise to come and visit, and then like on the day they would call and say, oh, sorry, something's come up, I've been called into work, or I'll come another time, and then another time never came. So I was feeling so I felt abandoned by the community because of this expectation that I had in my mind that, when I have this baby, people are going to come and visit me. We were prepared. We had the food, we had the drinks, we had the catering. Everything was ready for these visitors that did not arrive. Like, not to say I didn't have visitors. I had visitors, but I think the expectation that I had in my mind was to have so many visitors, and that didn't happen. So that was another unmet expectation, another disappointment, being a first-time mom. And then the other thing that I was disappointed in is, I don't know where I had this fantasy that, when I had the baby, people would come and would go to places. Like, it was all based on what people were going to do for me, and then it was going to make it easier for me to move around with the baby. And I found I spent so many days indoors, like just me and the baby, just feeling like I don't know, it was a feeling of imprisonment. I felt like my feet were glued to my house. It felt like such a mission to even try and, get the baby ready and go out somewhere so we can get some fresh air. I would always wait for my husband to come to work, and then, if he had time, maybe we'd go somewhere. It was based on who was free to come and help me, like who was going to come and help me. That's where I was in my mind at that time. And I was so disappointed, and I ended up feeling so, I don't know, it was just this feeling of, I've been abandoned. I'm so lonely. I don't know. It's just me and this baby in the world, because I had all these expectations, how people were going to come through for me. And because of so many other things that were going on in that period, like people were busy, people couldn't really come and visit. And not that people didn't want to, like there were some really legitimate reasons, but it left me so disappointed. And my life lesson came from that period that, the fastest way to get disappointed is to have expectations based on things that are out of your control. And that was me having expectations of how my birth was going to go, which was completely out of my control. Me having expectations of how people were going to come through for me, which was completely out of my control. And that wasn't even the end of the disappointments. Once I got over the birth, well, I didn't get over it. It took a few years, but once I got over that story, once I got over the fact that, people didn't come and see the baby, I met yet another set of disappointments, and that was the baby itself, like not doing what I expected the baby to be doing. So I have shared previously that I was part of a mother's group when I had my son. One of the best things that I ever did as a new mother was to join this mother's group. There were about 8 of us or so, and we all had kids the same age. We met from round about the time my son was 8 weeks old. So it was these ladies with their children who were the same age as my son. And these kids were doing things that my son wasn't doing. Like, they started even rolling over. I think my son developed in his own time, and it was a bit later than everyone else. So, I would see these kids starting to roll over, these kids starting to sit, starting to crawl, starting to walk, and my son still wasn't doing these things. And I just felt like I felt like I was doing something wrong. Like, what am I doing wrong? How come my son's not developing, at this pace? And then came potty training. Things weren't progressing in that area. Talking, which was one of the most stressful things for me. My son didn't talk. Like, my son didn't speak in sentences, like, until he was 4 years old. And he wasn't fluent in talking until he actually went to school, until he was about 5. My son used to like babble, like do like baby talk, even when he was 3-4 years old. And I was so worried that, my son had a speech delay, and he didn't walk as fast as I thought he would walk and all that. And if you know my son now, he's 8 years old. I do not know a child who talks as much as that boy. Like, he speaks so fluently. Like, he is fully toilet trained. He's crawling, he rolls over. He's doing all the things that I was worried and stressed about when he was a baby. And I realized that I had these expectations of a little human being I had no control over. And I just expected, okay, by this time you should be doing this. By 2, you should be speaking in sentences. You should be talking. You should be doing that. By this time, you should be doing this. And, it added to this just journey of disappointment upon disappointment. And I learned that in life, you can never have an expectation of things that are out of your control. And you can never have an expectation of things that have not been communicated and agreed. For example, if I say to my friend, let's meet for lunch, I have communicated that, and I say, let's meet at 2:00. And then she says, yeah, I can meet you at 2:00. It is realistic for me then to have an expectation that you are going to show up at 2:00 at this place and we're going to have lunch, because I have communicated that. It has been agreed. So it is something that I can expect. If I hadn't communicated that, I couldn't have that expectation. So that is the only kind of place you can have an expectation, whether it's in a marriage, in a relationship, it's at work. If you've got a need, unless it's been communicated, unless it's been agreed, you can have an expectation. You can't have an expectation outside of that. And if you do have an expectation, please expect to be disappointed. That is the only expectation you should have. The expectation to be disappointed by your own expectations, which have not been communicated. So that is the life lesson that I learned, that, you can't, there are things that you can control. Those are the things that you should have expectations of. For example, today I expected to film this video, and it was a valid expectation because I had an agreement with myself that I was going to wake up at a certain time and do certain things and then be here and film this video at this time. And it was within my control. So, my motherhood journey really, really, really humbled me, I think, and really made me put things into perspective and see things clearly, like that I could apply to, all aspects of life. That don't have expectations of people that are out of your control. Don't have expectations of things that, you just cannot. You can't control. You can't control a child. You can't control what they do when they do it, because they're just a human being who is functioning. They're a whole machine that is outside of you. So drawing on that lesson, there's a big gap between my 2 kids. My son's 8, my daughter's 2. When I had my daughter, because I had learned from that experience not to expect things from people, there was no carton of Coca-Cola that was bought. There were no bickies and fruit and, chips and snacks and catering spread that we prepared for visitors. It was on a, as needs basis. Literally, we just had our baby, didn't expect anything from anyone, didn't expect people to come and visit. We were very happy to see the people who did come and visit, but it wasn't an expectation we held that, oh, people are going to come and visit the baby all the time. No, we just had our baby, had the most wonderful time as a family, bonding with our baby, had friends and family visit. But it was so, when people came, I was like genuinely happy that they did. If they didn't, I hadn't expected it. So I wasn't disappointed. Then even the journey with the baby, I didn't expect that my husband was going to come from work and take us, and people were going to come and ask me to go out for lunch and whatever. My daughter and I were out at least 3 times every week. I would just get into my car, put my daughter in the car seat, get the stroller, pack the bags, would go somewhere, have a coffee. Just me and my daughter, the 2 of us, would go somewhere, have lunch, would go somewhere, do something, go shopping, do this. And sometimes, people would say, hey, can we do something? I would say, of course, let's do it. If they didn't show up, if they couldn't make it, no problem. I would just have me and my daughter do these things. And I was always out of the house. I was busy. I was happy. My mental health was so much better than when I had my son, because I wasn't basing my happiness on expectations of how people were going to come through for me and what people were going to do. And even when it came to the development of my daughter walked even later than my son, but I wasn't disappointed. Because I knew, sooner or later she's going to walk. It's out of my control. I'll just enjoy whatever she is doing at this moment. And she walked after her first birthday, way after her first birthday. But I hadn't had an expectation that by 10 months you should be walking. By this time you should be rolling over. By this time you should be talking. I'm just letting her do what she does, develop at her own pace, do what her body is ready to do at that time. And I'm not stressing myself. And I think I have found a place called peace by applying that in my life, in all aspects, whether it's at work, whether it's in my relationship with people, with my husband, wherever, just to have a place where I'm not having expectations that are out of my control. And if I have, it's not to mean that, you shouldn't have expectations. You should. I do have other expectations where I have communicated things and we have had an agreement. Then I'm like, okay, now I have an expectation because this is now actually an agreement and I have expectations there. But anything outside of that, I'm just like, it's out of my control. There's nothing I can do. I can choose to be disappointed and sad and whatever, but I'm just going to do things that are within my control. Now I set goals for myself. I'm like, okay, now I expect myself to do this, and this. It's within my control. I can make those things happen. And I'm finding so much joy, so much peace in this period of my life because of the lesson that I learned those many years ago, raising my son. And it's such an applicable lesson in so many aspects of life. And I'm just so grateful that my son was able to help me learn those lessons, and my journey to having him and to raising him was able to help me with all these things that have made me find a very peaceful place in my life. And I just wanted to share that with you, with any new mothers, overseas, in their home countries, wherever you may be, that, one of the things that can make parenting very stressful is to have expectations of how people are going to come through for you, how people are going to help you with the baby, how people are going to just show up for you as a mother. I think, you can be so much more peaceful, so much more mentally healthy when you don't have those expectations and when you just have goals for yourself, things within your control. What can you and your baby do that, if you're like me and you didn't heal as fast from your delivery, what are things that you can do that are not so strenuous but can help you get fresh air? You can take a short walk, even in your own street. You can do things. You can plan the day ahead. Okay, what are we planning to do tomorrow? What are we going to do that other day? Do things within your control. And when people meet and show up for you, it'll just add to your joy and it will not take away anything from you. So, that's it for me, guys. That's a life lesson that I wanted to learn from you that has brought me, to such a better place in my life. And I'm so glad that when I had my daughter years later, I didn't approach things the way I approached them when I had my son. And, it was such a beautiful journey. So yeah, that's all from me, and I'll see you in my next video.